Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who joins us from around the world.
We're so glad you're here.
This is Andrew and Renee. Welcome to the Stack series.
It's wonderful to be back.
Today, we are exploring the cosmological imperative, ethics, and the pursuit of knowledge in ancient scientific traditions.
It's a huge topic.
Yeah, it's a huge topic, and honestly, it's something that I think is going to resonate with a lot of people because it touches on a tension that, well, that we all feel in the modern world.
Absolutely.
I was going through the research you sent over, and I had this kind of moment of realization. You know that feeling you get when you're watching a movie like, say, Jurassic Park, or you're reading about the latest AI development?
Oh, yeah, the life finds a way moment. Or maybe the what have we done moment.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
But specifically, that line that Jeff Goldblum has, your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
That line has probably become more relevant every year since it was written.
It really has. Because we live in this world where we seem to have these two totally separate buckets. On one side, we have the science bucket.
Right.
You know, it's all facts, data, hard numbers, building the bomb, editing a gene, figuring out the algorithm.
The how, the mechanics of the world.
The how, exactly. And then, usually in a completely different building on a university campus, you have the ethics bucket.
The philosophy department.
Philosophy, morality, the humanities, the department that asks why, or should we treat them as if they're in different departments.
We treat them like they're in different worlds, really. I mean, if you walk into a modern research lab, the main question is almost always, what is the data telling us?
Or how do we make this more efficient?
How do we optimize this? The question of, is this virtuous, or is this good for society in the long run? Well, it's often seen as an afterthought.
Right. It's for the compliance department to worry about. It's a box you have to tick on a form.
It's a compliance issue. That's the perfect phrase for it. It's not seen as a fundamental, inseparable part of the science itself.
But what just completely floored me when digging into these sources is that for the civilizations we're going to be talking about today, we're talking ancient Greece, China, India, Egypt, Mesopotamia, that separation would have been completely unintelligible.
It wouldn't just be strange. It would have been seen as a form of madness, actually.
Madness.
I think so. For these ancient thinkers, you couldn't separate the two. The study of the natural world was, by its very nature, a moral pursuit. You couldn't study the movement of the stars or the flow of a river without also studying justice, balance, and the proper way for a human being to exist.
So they didn't have a word for science that was separate from, say, wisdom.
Or law, or piety. They were all bundled together. To know the world was to know your place in it, and to know your place was an ethical demand.
And this brings us right to the central hook of our discussion today, a concept that the researchers are calling the cosmological imperative.
It does sound like a sci-fi title, doesn't it?
It really does. But it's this incredibly powerful idea that the cosmos, the universe, isn't just this neutral backdrop of cold physical laws that we happen to live in.
Right. It's not just a stage for the human drama.
Exactly. It's a sacred architecture.
That phrase really stuck with me. It provides the template, the blueprint for human justice and for social order.
That's the core of it. The idea is that the laws of nature and the laws of morality are not two different things. They are actually the same laws, just manifesting in different domains.
So if you violate one,
you violate the other. If you act unjustly, you are not just breaking a human rule, you are acting against the very structure of reality. You are creating a dissonance with the cosmos itself.
Wow. So our mission today is to really take a journey through these ancient traditions. We're going to traverse the stars of Babylon. We're going to look inside the medical clinics of ancient India and Greece.
Visit the alchemical furnaces of China and examine the incredible engineering feats of Egypt. And through all of that, we want to understand how they built a world where truth, as in what is real and goodness, as in how we should act, were essentially the same thing.
And maybe ask ourselves what we've lost by separating them.
I love that. And I think we really need to take our time with this because the mindset shift required to get there is just so massive. So let's jump right in. Let's start with our foundations. This is the stuff we think we know, the bedrock of these ideas.
Okay.
We're talking about the unity of nature and ethics. And in the sources, two major concepts just kept coming up again and again. The logos in Greece and maat in Egypt. Let's start with Greece.
The usual starting point.
Right. We always hear about the Greek miracle, this big shift from mythology to rational inquiry. But usually, When I remember this from history class, it's framed as something like, the Greeks stopped believing in gods and started doing math. How accurate is that?
That's a very modern, very secular reading of history, and it's not quite right. It misses the nuance. This is a pivotal moment, absolutely. You have these figures, the pre-Socratic philosophers.
People like Thales and Heraclitus.
Exactly. Before them, if lightning struck or the river flooded, the explanation was usually personal. It was Zeus is angry, or Poseidon is having a bad day.
Right. The gods were basically messy celebrities with superpowers.
That's a perfect description. The universe was run by their whims, their moods, their arguments. It was capricious and ultimately unknowable in a rational sense. You could only try to appease them.
So if it rains, it's because Zeus is crying. If the volcano erupts, someone stole Hephaestus' hammer.
Precisely. But then these thinkers come along and they start looking for natural causes. Thales is a great example. He looked at the world around him in Miletus, a port city, and he saw water everywhere. He famously said, all is water.
Which to us sounds a bit silly. My desk isn't water. This microphone definitely isn't water.
It sounds like bad chemistry if you take it literally. But what he was doing, the concept behind it, was utterly revolutionary.
What was the concept?
He was saying there is a unifying substance, a fundamental principle, an arch that unites all of nature. And crucially, we can understand it with our own minds without having to ask a priest what Zeus is thinking this morning.
So it's taking the explanation out of the hands of the gods and putting it into the hands of human reason.
Exactly. But, and this is the nuance that I think we always lose, they weren't abandoning religion.
They were just reorganizing it.
Precisely. That is a crucial distinction. They weren't becoming atheists in our modern sense. They weren't saying there is no divine. They were saying the divine is rational. They were searching for the logos.
Logos? Okay, this is a big word. It's tricky to translate, right?
Very. It can mean word or reason or account or principle.
Yeah.
But in this context, I think the best modern analogy is to think of it as the source code of reality.
Okay, source code, like for a computer program. Let's unpack that.
Exactly like that. Imagine you're in a video game. There's an underlying code that dictates that if you jump, gravity pulls you down. That's a physical law within the game. But in the Greek view, that exact same code also dictates that if you act with hubris, you will bring about your own downfall. The logos was the single rational principle that governed everything.
So it's both a physical law, explaining how the stars move and the tides change, and a moral imperative, explaining how humans ought to act.
Yes, there were two sides of the same coin. To understand the logos in nature was to be bound by it in your own life. To see the order in the cosmos was to understand the order you must create in your own soul and in your city.
So it's not just E equals MC squared. It's E equals MC squared, therefore I must live a balanced and just life.
In a way, yes. It's that if the universe is fundamentally rational and orderly, then a chaotic, irrational, unjust life is a violation of that cosmic order. It's like a glitch in the system.
So a sin wasn't just breaking a rule from a book.
It was acting against nature itself. Heraclitus has a famous line. He said, "The waking have one common world, but the sleeping turn aside each into a world of his own." To be ethical was to be awake to the shared reality of the logos.
Wow. That leads us perfectly over to Egypt. Because if the Greeks had logos, this rational principle, the Egyptians had Maat.
Yes, and Maat is, in some ways, even more all-encompassing.
Reading about Maat really blew my mind. It's described as truth, balance, order, justice. But the key thing is, it wasn't just an abstract idea like, be nice to your neighbor.
No, Maat was the fundamental fabric of existence. It was the law of nature in Egypt, personified as a goddess, but it was also the force itself. You have to visualize the Egyptian landscape to really get this.
Okay.
They live in this very narrow, very precious strip of green life along the Nile River, and on either side was the vast, red, deadly desert. The forces of chaos, which they called Isfet, were literally right there on the horizon.
So life felt precarious.
Incredibly precarious. For the ancient Egyptians, the universe was constantly at risk of dissolving back into that primordial chaos. Maat was the active daily force that held everything together.
So Maat is the wall holding back the chaos.
It's the force that makes the sun rise every morning. It's what makes the Nile flood predictably every year, bringing the fertile silt. It's what makes society function without descending into violence.
Yeah.
It's the active, constant maintenance of order.
And this brings us to one of the most fascinating examples in all the research, the 42 Laws of Maat. We tend to think of religious commandments as things like, thou shalt not kill or thou shalt not steal.
Right, they're about personal morality, how you treat other people.
And the Laws of Maat had those. But they also included things that, well, they just stopped me in my tracks, like I have not polluted the waters.
It sounds like it's straight out of a modern EPA regulation, doesn't it?
It really does. But you have to understand, for an ancient Egyptian, polluting the river wasn't just a civic offense. It wasn't a fine you paid to the city.
It was a spiritual impurity, a deep stain on your soul.
Why was it so serious?
Because the Nile was the lifeblood given by the gods. It was the physical manifestation of Maat in their world. To pollute it was to disrespect the gods, to reject the gift of life. It was an attack on the cosmic order itself.
You were literally helping chaos win.
You were disrupting the machine that kept everyone and everything alive. This is an incredibly early form of environmental ethics, and it's completely inseparable from their idea of spiritual salvation. When you died, your heart was weighed against the feather of Maat.
Right.
And if your heart was heavy with these kinds of sins, these violations of Maat, you were devoured and ceased to exist. The stakes were ultimate.
And the pharaoh, he played a huge role in this, right? He wasn't just a king in the way we think of one.
Not at all. The pharaoh's primary job description wasn't conqueror or lawmaker in a secular sense.
Yeah.
His job was to uphold Maat. He was the chief intermediary between the gods and humanity.
So science, then, becomes a tool for that job.
Absolutely. Science, architecture, astronomy, these were the tools he used to maintain cosmic order. When they built the pyramids with such incredible precision, aligning them to the cardinal points.
That wasn't just showing off their engineering skill.
It was a holy act. It was creating a structure of perfect order, of Maat on Earth. When they designed those incredibly complex irrigation systems to manage the Nile floods, it was a ritual act of maintaining order against the chaos of flood and drought.
So an engineer in ancient Egypt wasn't just a guy who was good at math.
He was a priest of order, a servant of Maat. The natural world was seen as an extension of the divine, so understanding how it worked, which is what we call science, was a form of worship.
It makes so much sense when you put it that way. If you build a canal that fails and floods a village, you haven't just made a calculation error.
You have failed, Matt. You have let a little bit of isfet, a little bit of chaos into the world.
It's such a holistic view. Rituals, temple building, agriculture, law, it's all part of the same project.
The project of maintaining cosmic order.
Okay, I want to pivot now to something a bit more personal. The human body. Because this ethical imperative didn't just apply to the stars and the rivers. It applied to our own health.
Yes, and we see a massive shift in medicine in both Greece and India happening around the same time, which is fascinating in itself.
This is the era of what the research calls rationalizing the body.
Great phrase. In Greece, the big name is, of course, Hippocrates. And again, just like with Thales and the Logos, we see this rejection of the angry gods theory of disease.
Right. Before this, if you had a seizure, it was called the sacred disease.
Exactly. People thought a god had literally entered your body and possessed you. Hippocrates came along and said, in essence, no. This has a natural cause, just like anything else in the world. Its origins are in the brain.
A material cause. And this is where we get the theory of the humors, right? Blood, phlegm, all the gross stuff.
Yes, the four fluids. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Now, we have to be very careful here. Biologically, the theory of humors is completely wrong. We know that now. We don't have something called black bile circulating in our bodies.
Right. If my doctor tells me my yellow bile is a little high, I'm getting a second opinion immediately.
Please do. But philosophically, the theory was brilliant.
How so?
Because it defined health as balance, or eucrasia, and it defined sickness as an imbalance. It moved medicine away from a battle between a healer and a demon and towards something you could manage with diet, exercise, and your environment.
So it empowered the patient and the doctor.
Yes. If you were sick, it was because your internal balance was off, maybe because of what you ate or the weather or your habits. But what's really crucial for our discussion is the ethical contract that emerged alongside this new science.
The Hippocratic triangle.
Exactly. The 3 points of the triangle are the physician, the patient, and the illness. In the old model, the healer was a magician battling a demon, and the patient was just a passive victim, a battlefield. In the Hippocratic model, the physician and the patient become partners, allies in a fight against the illness. And this new relationship required trust, a deep, profound trust. And that's what led to the Hippocratic Oath.
Which doctors still reference today. First, do no harm.
Actually, that specific phrase, primum non nocere, isn't explicitly in the original Greek text of the oath, but the sentiment is absolutely the core of it. The oath was revolutionary because it wasn't just a technical manual on how to set a bone.
It was a moral code.
It was a moral code that protected the patient. It established that the physician has a duty to the patient that transcends profit, personal gain, or even social status. It professionalized medicine by making it ethical.
It's a kind of guild protection, but it's for the benefit of the customer, not just the guild itself.
That's a great way to put it. And here's the amazing part. Thousands of miles away in India, something remarkably similar was happening with Ayurveda.
It is such a striking parallel. We have the Charaka Samhita, this foundational text from around the 1st or 2nd century AD.
Yeah.
And the ethics here are, I mean, you highlighted this passage, they're incredibly rigorous.
Yes. There's this beautiful metaphor that contrasts two types of doctors. It says the physician who practices medicine for money, for profit, collects a heap of dust.
A heap of dust. That is such a powerful dismissal of wealth.
It is. But the one who practices for compassion, the word is karunya, that physician finds real gold. It explicitly frames medical practice not as a trade, not as a business, but as a spiritual path, a form of service.
In the selection process for students, it wasn't just about being smart.
Not at all. It was intense. You couldn't just have good grades or come from a wealthy family. The texts say you had to be of noble nature, devoted to truth, and free from greed, vanity, and lust.
They vetted your character before they ever taught you the science.
Your character was the prerequisite for the knowledge.
That is so profoundly different from today. I mean, medical schools interview you, sure, but they're mostly looking at your MCAT scores and your organic chemistry grades. They're not really asking, are you free from vanity?
And perhaps they should be, because in both the East and the West, the ancient view was that you could not separate the technical skill of the doctor from their moral character. If you were a bad person, greedy, angry, careless, you simply could not be a good doctor, no matter how much anatomy you had memorized.
Because knowledge was seen as a powerful force. You don't hand a loaded weapon to someone who is unstable or malicious.
Precisely. In the ancient view, you do not hand the secrets of life and death to someone who lacks virtue. The skill and the character were one.
Before we move on to the debates, there's one more foundation I want to touch on, from Mesopotamia. Because when we talk about truth, we often think of these lofty philosophical ideas, or stars, or medicine. But in ancient Babylon, truth looked a lot like a standardized weight on a merchant scale.
Ah, yes. The infrastructure of truth. I love this. We look at Hammurabi's code, and we usually just think of the brutal stuff, right? An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth.
It sounds barbaric to our ears.
It does. But a huge part of that code, most of it in fact, was about regulating trade, construction, and agriculture. It was about creating fairness. And a key part of that was standardization.
What do they standardize?
The code mandated precise weights and measures for commerce. The shekel, the mina. Now, just for a second, imagine a marketplace without standardized weights.
It would be complete chaos. I go to buy a measure of grain, and the merchant uses a stone he calls a shekel. But it's actually lighter than the standard one. It'll get ripped off.
Exactly. The weak get cheated by the strong, the clever cheat the simple. If every merchant uses a different size weight or a different length for a cubit, trade becomes impossible and fraud is rampant. Society can't function.
So Hammurabi's code introduced science in the form of measurement, standardization, quantification to serve justice.
Perfectly put. The scale in the market isn't just a tool for weighing grain. It's a symbol of fairness, of justice itself.
For the goddess of justice is holding a scale.
And it's not a coincidence. By using scientific consistency to standardize these measures, the state was creating a landscape of fairness. A stable, trustworthy economy required scientific consistency.
So again, the technical details of measurement served a higher moral end: justice and the prevention of fraud. Truth in the physical sense. This weight is exactly when mina became truth in the moral sense. This transaction is fair.
It's another example of that fusion. You can't separate the two.
It's fascinating how all these foundations, logos, Maat, the Hippocratic ideal, Hammurabi's measures, they all point to the same fundamental idea.
Right.
That a world where understanding how things work is the first and most important step to acting smoothly and justly within it.
It creates a sense of coherence, of integration that I think we often miss today. We feel fragmented. They felt integrated.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But, as coherent and simple as it sounds in retrospect, it wasn't always a smooth ride. There were deep disagreements, fierce debates, and very different ways of viewing this relationship.
It was never monolithic.
Not at all. And this brings us to a massive topic, a real hornet's nest of academic debate. So let's move into our second section, active debate. This is where the story gets messy.
The way history usually is.
And we have to start with a big one. It's a famous question in the history of science known as the Needham problem. When I first read about this, I was confused. The question is essentially this. Why did modern science, the kind that leads to the Industrial Revolution, advanced physics, that kind of thing, happen in Europe and not in China?
This is the heavyweight championship fight of historical philosophy. It's named after Joseph Needham, who was a brilliant British biochemist who, during World War II, was sent to China and just fell completely in love with Chinese culture and history.
And he dedicated his life to it after that.
Yeah.
Right?
He spent the rest of his long life documenting the history of science and technology in China in this massive multi-volume series called Science and Civilization in China. And the reason it's a problem is because, on paper, if you were a betting person in, say, 1400 AD, you would have put all your money on China to have the first scientific revolution.
Right. Let's just list the stats here for a moment. China invented paper. They invented the compass. They invented gunpowder. They had movable type printing centuries before Gutenberg.
They had the most advanced astronomical records in the entire world, as we'll discuss later. They had a meritocratic bureaucracy that, in theory, selected the smartest people to run the country. They had blast furnaces for iron production while Europeans were, still banging rocks together in comparison.
So the question is, with all that technological and institutional advantage, why did the Industrial Revolution start in Beijing in the 14th century? Why did it wait for England in the 18th?
That's the Needham problem.
And into this debate steps Feng Yulan. He's a Chinese philosopher writing in the 1920s trying to make sense of this. And his answer, it's incredibly provocative. He basically says, we didn't have that kind of science because we didn't want it.
That is a bold simplification, but yes, that's the core of his argument. Feng argued that Chinese philosophy, which for him was this blend of Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism, focused almost entirely on the internal world.
Cultivating the mind, the heart, the sin.
Exactly. It was about human relationships, social harmony, and achieving a kind of spiritual tranquility. He contrasted this with the Western Baconian view of science. Francis Bacon, the English philosopher, famously said knowledge is power.
And he meant power over nature, damming the river, mining the mountain, controlling the physical world.
Precisely. Feng argued that Chinese philosophy preferred the enjoyment of nature over having power to control it. The goal was harmony with nature, not dominion over it. If your primary goal in life is internal cultivation and harmony, why would you spend your time dissecting frogs or calculating the trajectory of a cannonball?
So his conclusion was, China had no science because there was no need for it.
According to its own philosophical priorities, yes.
But isn't that, I don't know, a bit arrogant to say we didn't need it? I mean, antibiotics are pretty useful. Electricity is quite nice.
It does sound arrogant if you look at it from our modern perspective, where we tend to judge a civilization by its technological output. But Feng was arguing for a completely different hierarchy of values. He was saying, we valued wisdom over mechanics, and we think that was the right choice.
But Joseph Needham, the man the problem is named after, he pushed back hard on this.
Oh, he pushed back with decades of research. He said, no, Feng is wrong. China did have science, a massive, rich, continuous scientific tradition.
This is the great counter-argument.
Needham's entire life's work was dedicated to proving this. He argued that China had a robust scientific tradition, and that it was often deeply linked to Taoism and its focus on naturalism. Taoists were obsessed with nature. They observed it more closely and carefully than almost anyone.
So this is where Nathan Sivan, another great scholar of Chinese science, comes in and adds a crucial layer of nuance.
Yes. Sivan steps into this debate and says, maybe the distinction isn't science versus no science. Maybe it's quantitative versus qualitative.
Okay, we break that down for us. Quantitative versus qualitative.
Western science, really starting with Galileo and Newton, became obsessed with mathematics, quantifying everything. How fast does the ball fall? What is the exact angle of the ramp? What is the mathematical formula that describes planetary motion? It treats the world like a machine made of predictable, measurable parts.
Right. The universe has a clockwork mechanism.
Exactly. Chinese science, Sivan argued, tended to frame the world not as a machine, but as an organism.
A living body.
Yes. And if you view the world as a living organism, you don't try to take it apart to see how the gears work, because that would kill it. You try to understand its rhythms, its flows, its patterns. You try to resonate with it.
So they use different conceptual lenses?
Entirely different. They use lenses like qi, which is the vital energy flow, yin-yang, the balance of complementary opposites, and the 5 agents or 5 phases, the wuxing. So they excelled in fields that fit this model, like medicine acupuncture is all about restoring the flow of qi or astronomy or harmonics, things involving cycles and flows. But they didn't develop the kind of mechanistic physics that leads directly to steam engines and factories.
So they weren't failed scientists who just didn't discover Newton's laws. They were playing a completely different game with different rules and different goals.
That's the argument, and it's a very powerful one. It reframes the whole question.
Now, there was a more modern critique mentioned in our sources, too, that really stirred the pot. A correspondence in the journal Nature by a scholar named Peng Gong. He suggested that certain cultural genes might have hindered technical curiosity in China.
Cultural genes is a very controversial phrase.
It is. What did he mean by that?
He pointed to 2 major cultural forces. First, the overwhelming influence of Confucianism, which for centuries prized becoming a loyal administrator above almost all else. The goal of every smart, ambitious young man was to pass the extremely difficult civil service exams.
So all the brainpower of the nation was being channeled into bureaucracy and governance.
That's his argument. It's like if all of our smartest physicists and engineers today decided to quit their labs to become corporate lawyers or management consultants, the intellectual energy is directed toward social order, not technical innovation.
That's a great analogy. And what was the second force?
He pointed to the Zhuangzi, a foundational Taoist text, which often idealizes a kind of wise isolation and avoiding conflict or worldly ambition. Gong suggested that these deep-seated cultural values might have discouraged the kind of aggressive, competitive, I'm going to figure this out, technical curiosity that often drives scientific breakthroughs in the West. It's a hot debate because it touches on these very sensitive questions of how culture shapes the very questions we're willing to ask about the world.
Speaking of questions and this tension between internal and external, let's talk about alchemy. Because when I hear the word alchemy, I immediately think of wizards in pointy hats trying to turn lead into gold just to get rich.
The get-rich-quick scheme of the ancient world.
Exactly. But in China, it was something far more complex and, frankly, more interesting.
Oh, absolutely. The alchemist's dilemma is a perfect example of this whole internal versus external tension we've been talking about. In China, you have this clear split between what they called Weiden and Neiden.
Weiden being external alchemy.
Yep.
That's the potion and furnace stuff, right?
Yes. That's the physical process of putting things like cinnabar, mercury, and lead into a furnace, heating them according to astrological timetables, and trying to create an elixir. But here is the crucial distinction that people almost always miss. They were not trying to get rich.
They weren't. So why get all the trouble to make gold?
They were trying to make gold not for its market value, but for its metaphysical properties. Think about it. Iron rusts, copper turns green, wood rots, food spoils. But gold stays gold. It is seemingly eternal, incorruptible.
It doesn't decay.
It doesn't decay. So the logic was, if I can create a form of this incorruptible substance that I can ingest potable gold or an elixir made from it, then I can transfer that quality of immortality to my own body. It was a spiritual quest using chemistry as its language.
You are what you eat, taken to its most extreme conclusion.
Exactly. But as you can imagine, there was a very serious problem.
Mercury and lead are extremely poisonous.
Very. And many Chinese emperors who were the primary patrons of these alchemists died from elixir poisoning. It created a crisis of confidence in the whole endeavor.
That led to a shift.
It led to a profound shift toward Neiden, or internal alchemy.
And Neiden completely flips the script. It says, forget the furnace. The laboratory is your own body.
Precisely. It says, stop eating mercury. You have the ingredients for immortality inside you already. The lead and mercury are metaphors for aspects of your own consciousness and energy. You use techniques like breath control, meditation, and discipline. You use your own internal energies, what they call Jing, essence, Qi, vitality, and Shen, spirit, to refine yourself.
So they kept the language of alchemy crucibles, firing, transmutation, but they applied it to a kind of spiritual psychology.
Yes. The process of turning lead into gold became a metaphor for the process of transforming a mundane, mortal consciousness into an enlightened, immortal one.
It's a fascinating evolution. It really asks the fundamental question. Do I look for a physical pill, a technological fix that makes me live forever? Or do I do the hard internal work of refining my own soul?
And that tension is still completely with us, isn't it? Look at the modern wellness industry, or even medicine. Do we look for a pharmaceutical solution, a pill to fix our focus, our weight, our mood? Or do we look for a lifestyle and psychological solution through diet, exercise, and therapy? The alchemist's dilemma hasn't gone away. It has just changed costumes.
That's a great point. It connects perfectly to another tension, one that I found really surprising from the Greek world, the Archimedean tension. We all know Archimedes. Eureka, the bathtub guy.
The guy who supposedly defended his city, Syracuse, from the Romans with giant claws that could lift ships out of the water and mirrors that could set them on fire, a death ray.
A certified genius engineer.
Yeah.
Maybe the greatest of the entire ancient world, but, and this is the shocking part, if you believe the historian Plutarch, who wrote about him centuries later, Archimedes hated it.
He was ashamed of it.
He hated his own brilliant inventions.
He viewed engineering and anything practical or mechanical as sordid and ignoble.
Sordid. That is such a strong word. Why?
Because for him, and for many elite Greek thinkers of his time, the highest form of science, the only thing worthy of a great mind, was pure thought. Abstract geometry, number theory, things that had nothing to do with the messy, physical, necessary needs of daily life.
So he built the war machines out of a sense of duty.
Exactly. He did it because he had a duty to his city, Syracuse, and to his king, Hiero II. But he apparently never wrote down how he built them. He didn't want to leave a manual for these sordid contraptions. The only writings he left behind were his treatises on pure geometry. He wanted to be remembered for his mind, not for his gadgets.
There's that tragic story about his death that just perfectly illustrates this mindset, right?
It's heartbreaking. When the Romans finally breached the walls of Syracuse after a long siege, a Roman soldier found Archimedes in his study. He was so absorbed he was just drawing geometric figures in the sand on the floor.
Completely oblivious to the battle raging around him.
The soldier ordered him to come along to meet the Roman general, Marcellus, who had given orders to take him alive. But Archimedes, so lost in his work, just waved the soldier away and supposedly said, "Do not disturb my circles."
And the soldier, not knowing who he was, killed him on the spot.
He was killed for his devotion to pure, abstract truth. And this story highlights a hierarchy of values that is almost the complete reverse of our own today.
How so?
Today, we fetishize applied science. If a scientific discovery builds a better iPhone, cures a disease, or makes a faster car, we see it as valuable. Pure theory is often seen as useless ivory tower stuff that taxpayers shouldn't have to fund.
Right. What's the practical application of this?
But for Archimedes, the practical application was a degradation of the pure truth. He wanted to touch the eternal forms, the logos, not just move a big rock from one place to another.
It really forces you to ask the question, is the purpose of science to understand the mind of God, so to speak, or is it to manipulate the world for our benefit?
The ancients, or at least the Greek elite, often privileged the former. We almost exclusively privileged the latter.
And maybe that fundamental shift in priority is exactly why we now have to have separate ethics departments.
I think that's a very real possibility.
That's a perfect segue to our next section. Because while they were debating these deep philosophical tensions, they were also pushing the absolute boundaries of what was possible for human knowledge.